Hello and welcome to the Construction Record Podcast. I'm digital media editor Warren Fry. On this episode, we have an interview with Megan Miller, the Director of Product Marketing for Deltek, which recently released a Clarity Architecture and Engineering study that looks at how digital adoption in those industries has reached a maturity phase and what effects that has on current and future productivity and work practices. But first, let's take a look at the news. In news from the East, TieBot and IronBot autonomous robots are now in commercial use in several U.S. projects with hopes to enter the Canadian market. They were created by Pittsburgh-based Advanced Construction Robotics. TieBot was released first and has been utilized at more than 40 construction projects, specifically in bridge deck work. What it does is saves human labor by autonomously tying a multitude of intersections of rebar grid. IronBot gathers, holds, and spatially places rebar on the proper grid pattern so that TieBot can follow and perform the automatic tying. ACR delivers the equipment to the site, assembles it, and a gantry system contains both IronBot and TieBot. But TieBot can work alone if the grid is already in place. The gantry is attached to the existing screed rails on either side of the deck installation, or ACR can lay its own portable rails. And you can read that story on the Daily Commercial News. We also have a story coming up on new regulations in Ontario that take effect July 1st, prompting construction employers to seek legal advice and take steps to ensure compliance. Staff writer Don Wall writes about regulations to upgrade toilet facilities at construction sites and require proper fitting work clothing. Also, Ottawa-based construction lawyer Paul Lalonde of Iman Harnden wrote an article last month advising construction employers on the reforms. He says he has had a number of conversations with construction clients looking for guidance as the deadline approaches. Quote, "It's not one where I've seen employers be frustrated with the change or feel that the change is unnecessary or unduly expensive or something that would be extremely difficult to comply with," Lalonde said. "When I'm talking to them, they're just looking for the basics about what it is we have to do here." Quote, "They see it as something similar to what they've already had to be doing, and it's just a tweak." Ontario's Minister of Labour, Immigration, Training and Skills Development, Monty McNaughton, announced the new standards for construction washrooms in March. The legislature also requires women in construction and workers with diverse body types to be outfitted in properly fitting gear, including uniforms, boots, and safety harnesses. And that story is also available on Daily Commercial News. And in our stories from the West, one of the biggest developments in the city of Victoria's history is closer than ever to being built. The Roundhouse at Bayview originated more than 10 years ago as a single 25-story residential building, but never materialized, even though a master development agreement has been made between the city and developer Focus Equities. Now, Focus has put forth a mammoth proposal with up to 1,900 new homes for the same site. Last month, Victoria councillors unanimously voted for city staff to work with the developer to finalize designs for the site. The current development proposal would contain 9 towers with podiums ranging from 18 to 29 stories tall and double site density. It'll rehabilitate the nationally recognized heritage buildings on site and add 76,000 square feet of commercial and retail space. Of the 1,900 new homes, 156 would be affordable rental units and 150 would be dedicated rental units. The developer has also proposed donating the northwest corner of the property to a nonprofit housing provider for the construction of the 156 units. Quote, "This is a significant benefit to the city as both the cost and availability of developable land in Victoria is one of the biggest barriers to building affordable housing. At present, the Greater Victoria Housing Society is intended to be the recipient of the land," unquote, reads a city staff report on the development. And this month's feature is on apprenticeship and skills training, including this story. When COVID-19 hit, nonprofit organization Solar Alberta put all its training and educational content online and then discovered that a large pool of interest was coming from outside the province. Quote, "We decided to stay online," said Heather McKenzie, Solar Alberta's executive director. "We were seeing a lot of interest coming from Eastern Canada and all over the world, and before they came here to work, there were a lot of folks taking these courses. The courses, which are open to the public, serve as an industry bid to supplement needed labor skills and provide information as the solar industry expands in Alberta. Quote, "We see a demand every day for people to work in industry. We need people badly. We want to welcome everyone, and we want to make sure we have enough people for our sector," McKenzie said. "Alberta is surpassed only by Saskatchewan as Canada's ideal site for solar installation," said McKenzie. "It now boasts 12,000 solar arrays, with a hefty portion of the installation having been carried out by Solar Alberta members." McKenzie said Solar Alberta has forged courses on its website that are easily accessible and recognize that individuals existing in the field and those wanting to train up to work in the field need to manage their time. The online courses, which range from 2 to 3 weeks, can be downloaded to meet a person's schedule. The cost is $175 to $250 per course. Members receive a 10% discount on courses, while those underrepresented in the solar industry, such as women, receive a further 20% diversity discount. "We have 3 types of membership," said McKenzie. Individual membership for students is $20, while others are $35. Solar Alberta has seen a doubling of its individual memberships in the past month, she said. The other 2 membership categories are solar businesses, commercial installers, suppliers, and microgenerators, and businesses using solar power, which join to keep abreast of new technology. And that's it for the news, but up next is my interview with Megan Miller. The reason we're talking today is because Deltek has put out their architecture and engineering clarity study, the 44th annual one, I believe. So I'd like to start with, this is an expansive study and there's a lot of partners involved. So maybe we get a bit of the history of how these studies came about in the first place, and then also how you put this one together, because there's a lot of data in this.
Sure. So for the last 44 years, Deltek has put together the Deltek Clarity Architecture and Engineering Industry Report. And this has evolved over the years. It originally was just a financial report and has evolved into 5 different sections that now we have business development, project management, human capital management, technology trends, as well as the financial management that has always been the core to the study. We work with industry leading organizations, including the American Council of Engineering Companies, the Association of Consulting Engineering Companies in Canada, American Institute of Architects, as well as the Society for Marketing Professional Services. And we not only work with them to help get people to participate in the study, but we also get their feedback to make sure that the questions that we're asking are still relevant, that they're still the ones that the industry needs to be hearing about and reading about. And then they also provide their feedback, and you'll see quotes from all of them as a part of the study this year as well. So we work with them to reach out to leaders in the industry, invite them to participate in the survey. And then we have a third-party company that actually conducts the survey online of those industry leaders, that they can complete any one of those sections or all the sections on behalf of the company. And then that study is usually about 2 months. So we're open early in the year from late January to mid-March, letting everybody close out their financials, because that's a critical part of our study. And then once we get all of that data, then we go across and we compile all that data, and then we start to segment that. We look for the medians, we look for different segmentations of, size of company, type of companies, so that as we share those results, people can really align with what makes sense for their business and see how they compare. So the biggest thing that we do from looking at the data is we really like to look at those year-over-year trends, and we try to find, how has that number changed from the previous year, but what does that mean? So just because the number went up or down, that's only a piece of the story, but why do we think that number changed? What's happening behind that? We are very engrossed in the industry as a whole and with our consultants and our other teams. And so we like to make sure that, we're taking that data, but also what we know is happening in the industry to figure out what's happening and what's impacting and influencing those numbers.
One of the bigger themes of this report is digital maturity. So maybe we could speak to, maturity implies that at one point these industries weren't mature, but they are now. So we could talk about that, and also how prevalent is that? Is that something they're still working on?
Yeah, so one of the things when it comes to digital transformation maturity is that we're looking at that as alignment between business strategy and IT initiatives. It's not specifically technology or applications that they're using. And so when we look at how firms are working in this, historically, architecture, engineering, and construction tend to be laggard industries. They're not the first to adopt any type of technology. But today we've seen that, 65% of firms have at least some alignment between their business and their IT goals, but they don't have that dedicated focus, or they haven't identified really that as being a top initiative. So they've seen that there's a need for it, but they don't have an action plan. That means that only 45% of them are actually in that mature advanced stage where this is a priority. They have a culture of innovation. It's ingrained in everything that they're doing. The good news is that that's actually up from just we had 18% last year that saw themselves in that mature advanced stage. And as we look at where we're going, just in 5 years' time, 82% of firms expect to be there. So doubling what they are now, which shows that there's a lot of aspiration to get there. Part of the challenge that we see with firms is that because of that alignment, the goalpost is always moving. So what defines digital maturity is different because the pace of technology is changing so quickly. But we are seeing more and more prevalence of that role of CTO, CIO being both information as well as innovation officers in this industry. And so we really see that alignment and having that C-suite presence or even that leadership presence is showing a much bigger commitment to this and a prioritization on digital maturity moving forward.
Now, part of that digital maturity is cybersecurity, because now that you're you being the hypothetical company, have adopted this, you've got to make it secure. And also you've got IT infrastructure you didn't have to maintain before. So what are some of the challenges, especially since this stuff changes every day, I'm sure, just like you were saying?
Yeah, so when we look at those challenges around cybersecurity and IT infrastructure, they're really tied together, right? They're one and the same, and you can't really separate those. So many companies are really continuing to manage those on-premises solutions, and they need to maintain the hardware. They're trying to maintain the servers, getting all the latest versions of all the software, and that requires a lot of layers of additional security and protection to make sure that you're keeping everything safe that you're working on those projects. And with that pace of change of technology, maintaining that infrastructure can be challenging. It's also challenging because oftentimes the clients are mandating the technology that has to be used on certain projects, or partners that you're working with on projects are mandating what needs to be used. So companies are having to require, or they're being required to maintain more and more different types of solutions, such as, using MicroStation, but also having AutoCAD, and just different project related tools to manage those different aspects. So that requires time and cost and expertise. And we think back to that, the goal of that digital transformation, it takes away your IT resources from those strategic initiatives that are going to help you move forward, because they're maintaining infrastructure, they're maintaining hardware, and that's not the best use of their time, which also then leads into the cybersecurity side. And actually, in this report, what we found was 18% of firms that responded experienced a cybersecurity attack or threat in just the last 18 months. So the increased prevalence of this is real, and that's making it much more of a priority for firms. We're seeing more and more firms moving their solutions, like their financial management, project management, to the cloud, and allowing experts to protect their data so they can go back and spend time on some of those more strategic initiatives for their business. And so as firms are looking to address both of those, that's where, they'll turn to companies like Deltek to help move those solutions to the cloud, help to maintain them, keep them on the latest version so that they can get the most out of those solutions without having to worry about, well, what's the latest type of cybersecurity threat? What's the latest thing that we need to be concerned about that we didn't even know about 2 years ago? And now we have to figure out a way to protect against it. So it's really more firms getting sophisticated in that and allowing the experts to do what the experts do, and allowing them to focus on the things that are more strategic and more productive for their business.
Just in terms of labor, I know construction is an ongoing labor shortage, but this might be a little different, or maybe it isn't a labor shortage. But I know AI is a whole other kettle of fish we won't get into. But in terms of needing people with specific tech skills that you can't find, or conversely, being able to streamline things because now you can automate stuff, or at least have one person doing a bunch of different tasks. What did you find in the report in that regard?
Yeah, so when we look at technology and how it really helps with labor shortages, the first place that we look is manual data entry, or that redundant work that requires, that may not require a specific person to do it. So there's typically opportunities in areas, again, like finance, where automation and technology really can help alleviate some of that unnecessary busy work. We actually found in this year's Deltek A&E Clarity report, 72% of firms reported that they are moderately or completely reliant on manual data entry and spreadsheets for accounting and finance. Which,
Wow.
everybody loves a good spreadsheet, which I completely understand. But there's also a time where, some companies need to be looking for ways to move away from those things. The numbers are actually worse when it comes to operations and resource management, where 74% of firms are completely reliant on spreadsheets. And so you think about project managers, engineers, architects, they love spreadsheets. It's hard to take those away, but there's definitely opportunity for some automation, as you mentioned, because it's really creating not only a disconnect of the teams because somebody has the spreadsheet, which means others may not, but there's more potential for data errors and other issues with that. So automating those tasks like billing, timesheet approvals, things that, that don't require a person, and you don't want somebody that's simply in your office just to chase people down and keep those processes moving, but allowing technology to do what technology is built to do. That's one key area from a technology and labor shortage perspective. But there's two other areas that we've seen as well. One of those is really around resource management. And so when it comes to the people side, firms are getting more and more sophisticated about how they manage schedules and resources, and it's becoming more evident where those gaps are. So when you think about, who should we cross-train? Where do we have gaps? Where do we have a potential influx of work based on what we're seeing in our forecast? And having more of an objective view of those schedules and those resources, because oftentimes we've seen that if you ask somebody if they're busy, they may be busier than they actually are, or they may not tell you that they're as busy as they really are because they're afraid of, they want to take on that opportunity. But having more of a true resource management and using technology in that way, you really can see where there might be shortages or overburdening of staff, which really can be helpful. And then just the everyday things of how you're managing projects, how you're delivering projects. And if you think about every place along that project lifecycle, from the initial setup of the project all the way through the project closeout, think about every place that requires human intervention. And you'll start to see opportunities where you can eliminate unnecessary tasks so those people don't have to be involved in those things. And that's really where you take the processes that align with your technology and make sure that you can see where things like automating billing or leveraging resource management, digitizing specification management, and using technology for that in a way that, it can alleviate that labor burden in some cases. It does require that teams will have to become a little bit more tech savvy in some areas. So you have to make sure that you're training them, because if you don't train them, they're not going to use them, and then it doesn't help anybody. But really, it gives them the opportunity to focus on the things that they're really good at and not spend their time focused on manual tasks that nobody really wants to do anyway.
Just in terms of, and I'm assuming this report came out during COVID as well, in terms of black swan events, we're both talking remotely here, and I'm sure many, many other people are going through the same thing. So that's a knock-on effect of COVID, just stuff like supply chains. Did this report sort of address that and how people have to factor that in their forecasting going forward?
So we did a report that same kind of timing where, we actually captured results in the right before COVID came out and as everything shut down. And so our results were a little bit different that first year because we still were taking a look back at the previous year's performance. But then the next year we did have some questions where we focused on how are firms addressing COVID? What are some things that were specific? And so, those are things that we continue to look for, of what are those trends? And we're not looking at those questions anymore, but what are the other things that firms need to be thinking about? So when we look at things like rising costs and we look at other challenges, we see some of those directly impacting how firms are thinking about the future. And a lot of that comes in every one of those sections. We ask about, what are your top challenges? What are your top opportunities? And we start to see some of those impacts specifically in those challenges and what rises to the top. We see things where, project managers are dealing with competing priorities. They're dealing with scheduling and cost challenges that maybe they haven't dealt with previously because they're trying to balance the rising costs, the supply chain disruptions that they didn't have to worry about when it came to project schedules in the past, in the same way that they do have to today. So those project managers have to be more nimble. They have to be more skilled in areas that aren't traditional from training a project manager of things to be thinking about. We also see that it's directly impacting schedules. So as project managers are thinking through, this client may be waiting to see how the past project performs and completes from a cost perspective before they know what they have to invest in the next project. And so there's some waiting and some variability that's happening in there. But all of that said, one of the things that we've really seen this year is, especially for architecture and engineering firms, they remain very optimistic. There's still some of that hesitation in the overall macroeconomics and what's happening, but they're seeing strong backlogs. They had a strong year financially last year, coming out of the pandemic. They've also had, they're expecting another strong year this year. Their backlogs right now are around 9 months. And after a really strong financial year, they're expecting a 10% year over year growth. So they're really just continuing to see those profitability numbers increase, and numbers that we really have not seen in the last decade.
And so part of this report is watching people digitally mature and seeing what the opportunities are. What about the people who, like you're observing all of them, so the people who are missing out on those opportunities or refuse to move forward, not refuse, that's not a fair way to put it, but just aren't moving forward for whatever reason, what are they missing out on as they go forward? And conversely, what are they just keeping on doing and that's working fine?
Yeah, so a lot of those firms, if they're really not adapting or embracing that technology, they're definitely going to fall behind in a few ways. We actually do a similar report in Europe and Australia, New Zealand region, and we asked a question this year that was a little bit different than what we had in North America, but still absolutely applies here. We asked firms how long it would be before they would lose market share without digital transformation, and nearly half said it would only take 12 months before they would lose market share because they weren't getting to another level of digital transformation. So when we start to think about that here, I think what we're going to start to see is it's going to start to show up in project selection, especially if you have tech savvy clients. There's going to be areas that seem like an extra today that's just going to become part of what's expected in that project delivery in years to come. And so it puts companies at a disadvantage if they don't have that as part of their scope, as a part of their offering, as a part of their cost structure, and haven't figured out how to incorporate that in, or they don't have the staff to be able to show the expertise when they're putting together their proposals and their cost proposals. Another area that we see is especially in human capital management or the HR side of things. Tech savvy firms are going to be able to recruit the right people faster just because they're using better technology to streamline the recruiting process. This is a particular note as we saw 38% of architecture and engineering firms have not updated or replaced their HR system in more than 5 years. So if you think about your technology that you have, your phone, your iPad, your whatever tablet device that you may have, and what that looked like 5 years ago, and how inefficient it is compared to what we have today, that's what we're using to try to hire staff. And so somebody else is going to get to them faster and be more efficient and be able to recruit them. It also impacts the attractiveness of the company. As those potential employees look for a place to work, they're going to be looking at it is absolutely a candidate market right now. They're looking for firms that are forward thinking, that are tech savvy, that will make their job easier, especially those that are just coming out of college or getting into the profession. So if firms aren't adapting to those challenges and those changes, they're going to fall far behind in client satisfaction, in overall project delivery, employee engagement, as well as recruitment. And so again, this is, as a technology company, right? This is one of the areas where we really like to align with firms for that long-term view of their world and their business, and be able to see what are they using today and are they using it to its full potential. Many times we see companies have technology in place, they're just not using it the way that it's fully designed. They haven't opened up the aperture and really taking advantage of that solution. Or there may be gaps in their technology suite, like updating their HR system or others that really can help to put them on the right trajectory. And then there's obviously things that, Deltek's not going to be able to fully provide in terms of project management and delivery from, some of the CAD and some of the other technology that's required for the projects. But making sure that you have those right tools in place and making sure they're the most current version, that you have champions internally, who is your person that is the go-to for all things MicroStation or AutoCAD or whatever those tools are, that's making sure that your teams have absolutely everything they need to have that competitive advantage.
And so finally, this is available to the public. I was able to download it with really no problems at all. So, I mean, anybody can. So where do they go to download? Because after they've listened to this, they probably want to read this report for themselves, and it's pretty extensive. So where would they go to find the report and download it?
Absolutely. So if you go to deltek.com, you can download the report from there. There's also a page, deltek.com/clarity-AE, and you can get the report there. There's also a series of webinars that you can join. There's a deep dive into every one of those sections, and you can look at all of the different themes that we are uncovering this year. We've talked about a couple of them here, but there's a lot more, as you mentioned, to dig into, and more than what we can get into just in the report itself, that, we really just give you the opportunity to take that next step with it. And I would always say that, the data is just the data, and the benchmarks are absolutely critical to see where your company is. But what you do with that is so much more important. And that this is really a catalyst for conversations within your business, that this is where we are today. Where do we want to be? What are the challenges that are facing your company? Where do you, how are you going to get to the numbers that you want to, or address some of those challenges? And then how is technology supporting those goals? Or where is your technology holding you back so that you can be in the right position to be able to be successful and set your strategy moving forward?
Okay, great. Thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
And up next, I have part 2 of my interview from the AIA with Michael Gux, our senior economist here at Construct Connect.
You also mentioned like the big bugaboo of last year was supply chains, and the year before that probably too. But that's kind of gone down, and now it's labor that's the problem. Not problems the wrong way to put it, but it's the most costly one to deal with.
Right. So the last 2 years, especially in 2020 and 2021, supply chains were just in this critical situation, and everybody focused a lot of their efforts around inventory control. The word hoarding was used a lot of times. Even in today's presentation, one of the people in the Q&A session said, hey, I'm still having difficulty getting parts here and parts there. Not a broad number of parts, but a few things here and there, but it still slows down everything else. And it creates a bottleneck. And what I was trying to say to him, but also to the group at large, is that if we back out and look at supply chain data a little more in the aggregate, what we're seeing is those conditions are generally resolving themselves. China has reopened. And that is helping move more products back into the U.S. Supply chain data from the Institute of Supply Management, they're showing really good supply chain recovery numbers. And so to the degree that, you're always going to have some small issues, but I'm trying to encourage people to not allow the small supply chain issues to affect their bigger supply chain issue, which really needs to be one of, we need to back off. There's too much inventory relative to sales already. Prices are going down on the spot market. So if you're going to hold a lot of inventory when everyone else has a lot of inventory, demand is falling, and the prices for that inventory is falling, you're going to get yourself into potentially a lot of trouble here from a financial perspective. You don't want to be in that position. So that was part of my message today, is just resisting the urge to treat your inventory like we have in previous years.
Right. You also mentioned that, and I'm sure this isn't restricted to construction, but it probably does affect construction. Labor more people are getting hired than ever, but productivity is lower than ever.
Well, it has definitely decreased, and that is a concern, right? We need to figure out how do we improve that number. We always want to see labor being more productive because that's essential to good, strong, real wage growth. And with this group at the AIA, right? I posed the question to them. I said, how can we design buildings and structures that are cognizant of the labor challenges we have out there? How do we use products that are less labor intensive? How do we build buildings in a way that is less labor intensive so that we can take advantage of those decreasing material costs while at the same time sort of mitigating our labor exposure, our labor cost exposure at the same time, right? And then that way, if those projects, if there's a deviation from plan, or if there's a deviation from expected cost, right, we're helping to control those costs, right? We don't want a building to be labor heavy and then find out the labor costs accelerate even higher, right? That would lead to a ballooning problem, and we want to stay away from that.
Michael, thank you very much.
Yeah, you're quite welcome, Warren. Thank you for your time.
Thanks for listening to the Construction Record Podcast. You can hear us on Amazon Music, Apple Music, and Spotify, as well as the Daily Commercial News and Journal of Commerce websites.